Cyber crimes are on the rise 125% just since 2020. And you don't need me to tell you that cybersecurity isn't just for IT departments anymore.
We all have a story of where everything is just getting smarter in terms of the attachments. It's a voicemail attachment. Oh, somebody left me a voicemail and it went to my email? Like,
right.
They're so wild and so much smarter these days. How do you avoid clicking on that attachment? What do you say to the average user?
Don't click.
In this episode, I sit down with Billy Spears. Billy has spent his entire career standing on the front lines of security. A Marine Corps veteran, founding member of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and now a global tech leader serving as the Chief Information Security Officer at Teradata. Billy brings unparalleled insights into the ever-changing cybersecurity landscape.
This summer, there's a lot of awareness around cybersecurity, right? So the best one I've seen so far, here's a good one for all you at home. What I got was, hey, here's 2 or 3 of the top tips and tricks I've heard this month. Click here for more. Oh, I was very close to clicking that, Katie. I was very close. And then I remembered my spidey senses peaked up and I'm like, that's a pretty random thing to get. So I had to run it through the scanners and check it. Sure enough, had all kinds of bad stuff behind it. So you got to be really careful out there.
He's also a podcast host, a LinkedIn thought leader, and let's face it, overall, kind of a big deal. Before we hear from Billy, if you're finding value in these videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It means a lot to me and my team working hard to create new content for you regularly. All right, Billy Spears on Technically Possible. Let's go.
There's some people in your orbit which just God presents to you that you feel like you've known forever.
That's true.
And that, my friends, is Billy Spears. Billy and
No. That's Katie Linendoll for sure. Oh, yeah, no. This is, I was telling you off camera, it was weird. We met and you go in our business, you're going a million miles an hour. And when you just hit those people that you connect to, like your whole world just stops. And that's what happened when I met you. And I think the more we nerd over technology and we exchange ideas and thoughts, I think both of our networks and all of the people out there are definitely going to want to be interested because we think differently, but we always come together in a mutually beneficial way, which is awesome for everyone out there listening.
Well, and that's what I love about you is you like amplify my ideas and you amplify my thoughts and you're like always positive about it. And we're both nuts. I'm like, we're like, yeah, hi, positivity, compliments. And I'm like, now let's talk about the 5 worst hacks of all time.
Yeah.
But we're putting a positive twist on this because here's what we're going to do because you're such an expert in the cyberspace, world renowned Billy Spears. We're going to say what was learned, the lessons learned, like the data point that was captured that said, be better from each of these hacks. And how I love to do drafts.
Good one.
You and I like sports. So the floor is yours. We're going to go backward.
Okay. I think the top, one of the top 5 for sure, maybe, well, I won't put a number on it just yet, but I think that one of them has to be the I Love You worm. Everybody remember that?
Yeah.
This was one of the most earliest and destructive malware incidents of our time. Remember, we just hit the clock from 2000. Everybody thought the world was going to end when it shifted, right? And then we got here, and what happened was they spread this email around with the subject line, I love you. What could be more positive than that? And it resulted in infecting, I believe it was over 45 million computers worldwide, which caused an estimated, at the time money, right? $5.5 to $8.5 billion worth of damage. So even elevate that to 2024 with inflation and all the things, you're talking still big deal even in today's dollars. And so the method was interesting. It was social engineering before social engineering was cool, right? So they enticed users to open this email attachment that was totally malicious, disguised as a love note. So they played on our emotions. And then I think just to kind of round out what you're asking for, which is a really cool twist, is what's the lessons learned? It highlighted to me the importance of user education on email security, and it began to drive awareness with the dangers of opening unsolicited email attachments.
How terrible to take I love you and just jack up so many people's computer systems. Like that's so terrible. All right, I'm going to riff off you at 4 because, and tell me if I'm playing right, because do you remember the Melissa virus? It was kind of similar to the I love you virus, similar in the sense that, and I had to do some homework on this one, type of email virus to 99 before the 2000s and vulnerability on the Word and Outlook side. And when I was doing my homework on it, I think the worst part I discovered was, and you probably know more about it than I do, but the virus could replicate itself. So essentially it went to the 50 first contacts it found in your in your digital Rolodex, if you will, your address book, and then it sent that out. So just the way that it just started replicating itself, it was just out of control. But I think what was interesting to me is at a time it was like ahead of itself. I feel like now there's a hack every single week, and it's just like, oh, another one, another one. Those were the ones that really stood out. What could we learn from that one, Billy?
I think what's most important is, do you remember how that one got its name?
No.
It was named after an exotic dancer and was one of the earliest and most infamous email-based macro viruses. And so again, it played on people's emotions, right? So I think that the send line was something like important message or critical message or something like that. And then when you opened it, the virus would trigger that macro, which is a fancy way of saying executable, right? So in 2024, we have executable files. Back then, you had macros. And then what it did is it opened up your email or your Outlook and it resent it to 50 people. And that was the problem, because once you got it, you didn't even realize it, and it was already doing stuff, and then it was multiplying. So it was this really hard thing to contain. So when you think about damage, from my perspective, the damage there was overload,
Oh,
because servers were crashing and it was overwhelming people because of the rapid nature of its spread, right? And then the guy, he was later arrested and he was sentenced for a really long time. I think if we looked it up, it was probably 15 or 20 years he went to jail for that, for releasing that virus onto the world.
I'm surprised it wasn't more than that, honestly.
Yeah, it was still early times. Think about it. So even 20 years, that's like a really long time. And I think that the damage, unlike the I love you virus, the damage was a lot lighter because it didn't really hurt people. It just kept everybody busy. But I think it was the impetus, excuse me, it was the impetus to spur improvements around email security policies. And then what happened next, the security team started implementing things like macro enabled or filters to detect these macro enabled files.
But it amazes me that how much smarter the attachments are getting these days. And I'll tell you one that I received recently. And I was like,
Oh,
you're in
good.
the midst of your crazy busy day and you're and everything. This one came to my inbox. It didn't go to spam. And it was about my TSA pre-check. And it said, your TSA pre-check's up and it's up every 5 years. And I was like, oh, I feel like I just did that like 2, 3 years ago.
Hmm.
And of course, there's like a little thing with it. And I hover over the address looks legit. And I'm like, something's not sitting right. Copy the address, put it in, quickly find out it's a scam. My point in all this is we all have a story of where everything is just getting smarter in terms of the attachments. It's a voicemail attachment. Oh, somebody left me a voicemail and it went to my email? Like,
Right.
they're so wild and so much smarter these days. How do you avoid clicking on that and attachment? What do you say to the average user?
Don't click.
Oh,
So I got one from a trusted source today. And they were like, hey, you're late for this meeting. And in my head, I couldn't reference what they're talking about. I look at my calendar, I don't see a meeting. They're saying, hey, you're late for a meeting. And I'm like, what meeting? What's it about? And they just sent me this link. And so I sent them back and said, hey, listen, I'm not it's not in my nature to click on random emails to go to a meeting I've never heard of before, but I appreciate you. So if you want to get on my calendar, here's how you do it, kind of thing. But that's what I got today.
that's
And that was crazy. Another one that I like, and there's a couple, like last summer, a big one was people get laid off. That happens, especially in technology, all the time. And people in technology are so kind. They're always trying to find people or help people land new roles, right? So you might get this email that says, "Hey, Katie, Bob just lost his job. I attached his resume. Can you look at it? And if you think there's some value, could you forward it to your contacts?" That seems like a legitimate thing. And it says Bob.resume, right? As soon as you open that resume, all this executable stuff starts to happen. And you're like, I was just trying to help Bob. And now you're swimming in a whole bunch of disruption that you didn't expect, right? That was last summer. This summer, there's a lot of awareness around cybersecurity, right? So the best one I've seen so far, here's a good one for all you at home. We're always trying to teach you, especially right now. It's the day before the last day of October. Cybersecurity Awareness Month is world renowned right now. What I got was, hey, here's 2 or 3 of the top tips and tricks I've heard this month. Click here for more. Oh, I was very close to clicking that, Katie. I was very close. And then I remembered my spidey senses peaked up, and I'm like, that's a pretty random thing to get. So I had to run it through the scanners and check it. Sure enough, had all kinds of bad stuff behind it. So you got to be really careful out there. All right. For 3 for me,
okay.
I think it has to go back. So first, I started with I love you. Now we want to cry. Remember, we're going to throw all the way forward to 2017. We got the WannaCry ransomware attack. It had global reach. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of computers across more than 100 countries. I think it was even more than that, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It included all sectors like healthcare, finance, telecommunications, and the exploitability here. It was a Microsoft Windows rootkit, right? And it was leaked originally from NSA's toolkit. I think the kit was called Eternal Blue, and it originated from NSA. And it's interesting because the largest impact on that I remember was it was the UK's National Health Services that was severely disrupting, and it led to a whole bunch of canceled appointments and surgeries and whatnot. And I think if you even go further there and you talk about the lessons, right? It highlighted the critical importance of things like timely patch management and the dangers of using outdated systems as a whole. Which, if you go to 2024, like there's so much like practice on discovering vulnerabilities, patching vulnerabilities, and then there's not a lot of a leeway in between.
This is a good one. And you stole one of mine. This is how fantasy works. You know, when you're drafting, somebody's going to take one of your picks. But I think one of the most, that was to me one of the most notable in terms of just the turning on the TV PR. We all heard about WannaCry and FedEx, Boeing, to your point, hospitals, government, universities, Nissan, big names, big companies, big government, all hit. Do you remember? I think there was a demand of like 300 million in Bitcoin, whatever resulted from that.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar off the top of my head what it was. I remember it was a large number, and it was the first time that companies had to choose: do you pay, do you not pay? Right? It was a tremendous amount, and it was, well, it would be a lot more now if it was Bitcoin, right? But back then, this Bitcoin idea was still fairly junior, but I still think it was worth something.
And that's the crazy part to me is you and I have talked about this before. I ask you, it's like, do you negotiate the return rate if it's accurate? In my homework is 8% that you get the data back if you agree to ransom. So that's a terrible gamble right there. Do you, Billy Spears, and the expert that you are, do you say to agree to ransomware? Do you negotiate?
I do not. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So
Okay.
sorry, everyone that's out there. We
Wow.
just do not do that. But that was a good one. That was a good softball quote. We do not. There's other things to consider when you start thinking about ransomware. But I like the statistic that you mentioned, right? It's the idea is, let's say we all submit for a second and we say, okay, we're going to pay. Great. It's still a very low likelihood that you're going to get your data back. And if you do, there's nothing stopping it from happening again. So you got to go change your systems and processes anyway. But I think for me, and I've said this to other people before, and maybe even to you, Katie, the idea of, I think paying encourages more cyber crime because ransomware behind the scenes funds things like criminal activities. It incentivizes attackers to continue targeting companies, organizations, government entities, right? And then I think if you add in what Katie suggested with the no guarantee of recovery, there's also a lot of legal and ethical concerns around here. And if you pay, you may violate some law that says you can't pay money in this particular jurisdiction around the world. So you really got to think about these things.
Oh, all right. Number two. Now you got me out of order. You got me frazzled, Billy. This might not be the biggest of all time, but I'm gonna have to go in the gaming world. The 2011 PlayStation Network going down for 70 million users. Here's the kicker to me. I forgot it was 23 days. Like, that's a significant amount of time. For gamers, that's not for nothing. Am I right?
No, that's right. If they're holding their breath, that's it. They've changed colors.
As like, I don't know, did this one come to mind for you? Or was
For
it
sure. I just didn't have it in the top five, but I think it's interesting not only because they hacked the PlayStation Network, right? And at the time, you're thinking John Madden games. You're thinking all your first party sort of shooter games. You're thinking this is the first time where gaming is starting to feel realistic in your home. And I know it's 2024, almost 2025, so they're going to be like, Billy, you're crazy. Have you seen it now? Yes, but you got to go back to where it came from in order to get to where you are. And this was the first time that it disrupted everybody because what it taught the industry was it was really important to encrypt your data and have proactive security measures to protect the customer information that resulted. Because remember, PlayStation was just starting that pay for service sort of philosophy that they have now. So people were putting the credit cards in, they were doing all the things. But then when this happened, people just almost stopped and was like, hey, wait a minute, because it affected, like you said, it was high 70 million of users, and it was this long outage. So how did gamers get their fix? It was a bad deal for Sony.
But it's a bad deal for Sony, but it's just going back to my point of it's so prevalent now. It's a bad deal for Marriott. It's a bad deal for credit cards. It's every week. It's a Home Depot. It's somebody else. And these are companies that we regularly deal with. And now it's just a gloss over. And I wonder what the accountability is as a company. It's like, okay, we're going to patch it. It's never going to happen again. Okay, but it did happen. We all got
Right.
our information jacked, all of our credit cards, all of our data. Like on the back end, and maybe it's I'm asking a question in this rant. It's like, what is the accountability these days, or are the regulations not caught up? Because it's every single week somebody else, and you're just like, oh, there it goes,
Yeah.
broken down somebody's passport in the middle of nowhere.
I think the challenge with we talk about all these kinds of things that happen. Technology's hard. I know. Here I am saying it. Technology's hard, and some people are like, "Boo hoo, get over it." I know that too. You're taking all these things and combining new things, and then you get excited about new technology, and you introduce that into the things, and now you can start to see the layers, and then you forget after 4 or 5 layers what was in that first layer. And that's when something happens because the unsuspecting people aren't as wise as the criminals. Because what are the criminals doing? They're going to your release notes, they're going to the things that you publish, and they're saying, hey, it's been a while. Let me check on that. And if you didn't fix it, or if something else came up in layer 3 or layer 4 that takes you back to a first layer sort of innovation that you've had in your company, maybe you weren't even the people there at the company that did that innovation or implemented it, but it still exists in your underlying infrastructure. So you have to go back and you have to continue to patch those things. By the way, just because you didn't create the code, if you will, doesn't mean you don't have underlying packages or other frameworks of code that you're bringing in from open source or other third parties. So you have to go back and make sure that's protected too. It becomes this complicated thing. So when I think about that stuff, I just think about the sheer volume of things that people have to deal with. And I'm thankful that there's folks like me all around the globe that'll come in and kind of help you find some calm in the midst of your chaos and kind of get you back running and remind you of the things that maybe you don't want to be reminded on a Monday after a long weekend. But it's really important. And to build that muscle memory in companies really pays off, not just for the company, your customers, byproducts of future customers, anyone around them, because they start to feel like they can count on you and your credibility just goes way up. And eventually that yields in the sales dollars.
What was the quote that you said on stage? You're like, nobody really likes the cyber guy until you need them.
That's right. When you walk in and you're like, hey, who's the cyber guy? And you see it. Everyone's air in their chest just goes, oh. Because what they think naturally in their head is like, here comes an impediment to something cool I want to do. And I'm like, well, time out. Nerds rule. The whole equation around pi starts everything turning. So if you go back to pi and you fast forward now, your cyber guy should be the HOV lane of creativity, folks. I'm telling you. So it should come in and be your fast pass. The first person you should say is, I got an idea. It's patentable. Where's my cyber guy? Right? Or gal. There's cyber gals out there. Bring those people in and talk to them, because if they're doing it right, and I challenge all of you out there, do this right. Help them get to a yes. And my philosophy is yes, if. Never a no. I've never said no. It's yes, if. Let's just get it done. But we got to do it the right way, because it's hard to think backwards. It's much easier to think forwards. Because I'm going to hit you with a good one here for the top one, because that's what I think. But I wanted to give you users a bonus one since you dropped one over here. You went to the 2011, but Sony didn't have enough. No, they went back to the well. This is a bonus one, folks. This is not my top
Oh, it is
risk.
2014 Sony Pictures.
That's right. So Sony 2014. And this was interesting because it was attributed to North Korea, if you remember that. And they were you got it. Yes.
I remember.
You want to tell them?
It was one of my picks. I'm not gonna lie.
Ah.
I actually was like, let's get some popcorn and watch this play out. I don't know why I found it like nerdily enjoyable, but I did.
That's right. And it was in retaliation for a film that they did kind of making fun of North Korea called The Interview.
They were like, all right, game. Like, I thought they were for sure gonna. They're like, no, your move. We're not gonna.
That's
play
right.
it."
Yeah, it was great. And I think what's there, it resulted in a bunch of leaked information and whatever, which was kind of interesting going back and forth. But it was the impact. How did the industry take what happened there? Because here's truly a state-sponsored attack that said, "Yep, I did it," which doesn't happen very often, right? And they were like, "We're showing our power and might." And I think it's interesting to show or highlight the risk of geopolitical tension spilling over into cyberspace and importance of having this comprehensive cybersecurity strategy that when I say, hey, I take the air out of the room when I walk into a room, the idea of a security person walking into a company that devalues the importance of security, all it does is invite these kinds of attacks from occurring. So we really got to have robust processes in place. We really got to have synergy within the companies. But most importantly, if you don't have any of that stuff, no money, no time, no budget, no know-how, phone a friend and Katie, I will come running. And if I can't answer, I'll find someone that can.
I got you on speed dial.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, there's a ton of stuff we can talk about here. I think the probably another impacting one that I would call out, and this is going to be a little
Your
controversial.
number
Uh,
one?
this is my number one. I think because of everything that's happened since then, I'm going to go back to 2020 ish, and I'm going to say the SolarWinds supply chain attack. Because this was another interesting attack that hit not just you directly, it hit you indirectly by attacking your suppliers. So unsuspectingly, you would acquire the damage without even knowing it, right? This was another one that was also attributed to a nation state actor, and it was compromising. I think they called it the Orion software, and it was infiltrating everybody else. It was widespread compromise, widespread panic, and really it targeted folks like the Fortune 500 companies. But because it was your suppliers or your third party or your vendors, what happened was it granted the attackers prolonged access to these systems because as you thought you got rid of it, it was still there because you do business with a lot of people, right? So I think that was one of the first times where it was super prevalent, where it demonstrated risks associated with the third parties that you trust and the software that you trust, and highlighted the need for more concepts of this zero trust security model. And for us, it also highlighted the importance of monitoring unusual or anomalous activity within the trusted networks and applications. That's not something we really looked at. Again, I'm taking you back to 2020. 2024 is a little different. But in 2020, you were like, hey, I trust them. Let me go focus on the things I don't trust.
Good one. I didn't see you going there for number one, but I feel like it was validated and justified. What are the three most common types of attacks when it comes to a business, especially ones that you're seeing hands-on at Teradata?
Yeah, I think the idea of phishing and social engineering has to be right at the top. And again, this is psychological deception, right? So when you really think about it, it's the attacker wants to create some urgency and wants to hit some point that you agree with or you relate to get you to take an action. So the attackers deceive an employee into revealing things like sensitive information or credential through mainly the use of fraudulent emails or text messages. Now we have this cool thing with QR codes. Everybody's got this fascination with take a picture of a QR code and magical things happen. Well, we call that quishing in my business. And the idea is if you're not really careful and you're just randomly taking pictures, you can also very, very quickly open yourself up to some susceptibility. The second part is what happens now. So now they open up the email or whatnot. Malicious software then injects things into your business network, and that encrypts this business data, rendering it absolutely inaccessible until some ransom is paid. This can halt your operations, lead to significant fines and loss and damage, and also your company's reputation. Because remember, it's human data, not company data. It's human data that sits inside these networks. So we got to really, really be careful about that. And then lastly, when you think about business email compromise, now this is a little bit of a twist because we talked about phishing just a few moments ago. This is where cyber criminals impersonate company executives or trusted partners to trick employees into making unauthorized wire transfers or disclosing confidential information. The funny story here that people will relate to is how many of you have a rich uncle you've never heard of in Nigeria, and he has to get home right now, and you must use Best Buy gift cards to get him home. This is a very common example of this exploit, but it still happens today. Because what happens is you catch someone off guard, they have the right name in an email, and they use that to compile some sense of urgency that you'll react to.
There you have it, our top 5 draft picks of worst hacks of all time, but on a positive twist, what we can learn from them. All
That's
of
right.
them. Businesses, individuals, everyone. Now we're going to get into some cyber tips from Billy.
So the first thing that I would say is Phishing is number one for consumers. Identity theft is the second one, especially around the holidays. And we're hitting that season now. This is where cyber criminals steal your personal data with the intention to commit fraud. This is send me $1, I'll give you $1 million. Do not send that dollar. You will open yourself up, your bank account, all these things. The other thing is stop using your debit cards, people. Your debit cards are never, ever, ever good. That's like a gateway into your account yourself. Use your credit cards. The credit cards are insured by the credit card producing agencies. That's a cool tip for you going into the holiday season. And then lastly, if you get malware, how many of you have ever had this pop up on your screen and it says, hey, click here so I can do some check to make sure you don't have malware? And the minute you do, 5 more windows pop up. Right, that's malware right from the start. So don't click on it. Go make sure you're using your anti-malware software. I could name a bunch, but I certainly don't want to promote them. Go find them and then make sure you get that stuff cleaned up. It's really, really important. And it happens fast. The number one thing people tell me is I just click for a minute and close the window. That's all it takes. The code runs behind the scenes. Remember, these are machines, not humans. So what can you do? You can be cautious with communication. Avoid clicking or downloading attachments that are unknown or from suspicious sources. Make sure you're verifying the authenticity of unsolicited requests for personal information. For example, I get thousands and thousands of requests on LinkedIn every single day. And I'm getting things like resumes or people's CVs, or sometimes I get all kinds of other things that they attach. And I have this really cool sort of out of office response that goes back to people that says, excuse me, I'm not going to download stuff that I don't know. Like, that's crazy talk. Can you imagine me downloading this stuff and then getting caught with malware or somehow getting myself into a network scam and I'm the one educating folks all over the world? That would be crazy. So be cautious. The next thing is use strong passwords. I can't tell you how many times people's passwords are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or I know it's a joke because we say we need password. So how many of your passwords are password with a capital P? And then we said make it complex, so you added a 1. And then we said use a special character, so you gave us an exclamation point to like say you have a password to yourself. Stop doing that. That's one of the most common passwords in the world. So it's kind of a far-fetched example, but really, really important. The next thing that I can encourage everyone to do is enable multi-factor authentication. This is something you have all the time. So if someone does get your username and password, or it's exploited in another breach, which happens all the time, you're still protected. You might get something that says someone's trying to log into your Yahoo, your Hotmail, your Gmail, your whatever you have, but you'll have that other thing that you have to validate. Now, here's a cool trick. The bad guys know this too. So if you get a bunch of messages, one right after the other saying authenticate, 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 that is a method to get you to react. Don't do it. Just go in and change your original password and you will be okay. The last thing is patch, 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 patch. Nobody does it. You have to regularly go find it. I can't tell you how many people tell me, well, I have Apple and it automatically does it. No, it does not. So you have to go in and you have to tell it you want to download the patch, and then you have to tell it to install the patch. So check regularly every couple weeks, especially with the new operating system like just launched a few weeks ago. So go make sure you do that. And then lastly, change your Wi-Fi network. How many of you let people in your home? They say, what's your Wi-Fi? You give it out freely and then you forget. So they're always on your network. Now, I'm not saying your guests are bad people. I'm saying if you're freely giving out, what's the point of having a password in it of itself? So consider setting up things like a guest network for your visitors. Really important. And then lastly, stay educated and informed. Hopefully, if you come back to this podcast, you'll get all the news for you. And if not, check me out. I'm all over social media and I'm always giving out cool tips and tricks.
Always giving out good tips. And one that you made me pause for a second when you were on stage, you were saying about your iPhone password going in. Like if you have 4 digits, go to 6. Like I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good one to just share with consumers. And is that one that you're often telling people?
You have 3 choices in your iPhone. You can have 4-digit. I get it. You're like, I want something, but I really don't want to commit, right? You have 6 digits, which is more common. And that simply says, hey, I have things like a birthday. I'm not sure what you guys put in there, but don't put your birthday. And then you have a more complex password, which mirrors what you might do at your business or in your place where you want to feel very safe. My recommendation is to go super sophisticated. Obviously, don't choose the 4-digit password. If you have to compromise, get a 6-digit in there. But my advice always to put a very complex password in.
Where can people follow you at?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Everything from LinkedIn catches everything else, and I'm definitely around. I would love the follow.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Billy.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, we appreciate you hitting that thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button. I'm Katie Linendoll, and don't give up the ship.